Joining us now for War Brief and the review of some of the headlines of today's newspapers from around the world is Adefemi Akinsanya. Good morning, Adefemi.
Good morning, Dr. Bati. How are you doing?
Good.
Good morning, Adefemi. Good morning, Rufai.
Morning, Femi.
Okay, let me tell you what is happening around the world. Now, EU leaders are gathering in Brussels today for a special council on defense. That's as French President Emmanuel Macron warns the continent, that's Europe, is at a turning point of history. Leaders are expected to discuss how the body can further support Kyiv in the face of US President Donald Trump's announcement on Monday that he would suspend aid and intelligence sharing to Ukraine. Now, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is invited to the summit, and we will be keeping our eyes and ears open for updates. Now, moving on to the African continent now, and campaigners have welcomed a court ruling to remove British colonial monuments from Uganda's capital, Kampala, and to rename streets that honor, quote, crooks and historical figureheads. Now, this court ruling actually came in last week, and Justice Musa Sekana directed the city authorities to remove the name of British figures from streets, monuments, and other landmarks. They include Major General Henry Edward Colville, an early commissioner of the Uganda Protectorate, and Frederick Lugard, who was a prominent colonial official in Africa with a reputation for cruelty. Now, new names will be found for roads and parks that reflect Uganda's culture after the ruling, which was a culmination of a 5-year campaign. Now, here in Ikoyi, there are plenty of roads still named after colonial rulers, including Lugard and Bourdion. Some have actually been renamed. You know, Kingsway went from being Kingsway to now Alfred Rewane. But it would be interesting to hear your thoughts on the courts in Uganda pushing for these changes and whether you believe there's appetite for the same to continue being done right here in Nigeria. What are your thoughts?
So I think it's a double-edged sword. Number one, there are some advocates that say, yes, we understand colonialism happened. We must also preserve history. We can't forget that it was a part of our lives. I remember when we had the Rhodes Must Fall debate and all of that. I mean, these were some of the arguments. Because if you want to start changing, then what reminds you of the colonial past? So probably we should start by changing Port Harcourt, which was named after, Lord Harcourt, to Iguacha, as it was formerly called in the past. But you cannot forget that things like that happen. So there must be a clear mix of both. But there are some other proponents that argue in favor and that say, yeah, let's remove all the vestiges of colonialism. Mm-hmm. But some will say, when we remove all of them, how do we remember not to get colonized again? Because see,
I mean, we're speaking their language. Are we not speaking
English? The problem
is
colonialism still continues. It has just changed. The colonialism happening today is economic colonialism. Watch all over Africa. Who builds most of your infrastructure? China. Who gives most of your aid? America. Who's supplying the weapons? Russia. Is that not colonialism 2.0? Mm-hmm. So it's just that you don't have boots of the ground colonial administrators any longer here, which you still have some of them anyway, but you don't have them holding the territory. But this economic colonialism is even worse than the one they did then when they were the ones running the nation. Mm. So we should think. Like I said before, the liberation of Africa will come from Africans themselves and not over-dependence on the West. Secondly, Macron painted a grim picture. What they are doing now is they can't trust Trump again as an ally. Mm. Trump has cut off intelligence to Ukraine, which is a very bleak one. And what he's pretty much doing is holding the back of Ukraine at the back and expecting them to fight Russia, which is not possible. So it shows that he's leaning towards Russia. In the last few days, I've been reading a lot of TASS, Russian news agency. They're all excited about what he's doing. Europe is now saying if they're probably going to make a package, like a 800 billion package, even loan a couple of countries 150 billion to be able to ensure that they mount some guard. Because if Putin is successful in this war, what they fail to understand, like Hitler, is the next thing he will look for another country and he will invade. And Europe is under threat.
Thank you, Rufai.
All right, let me go back to what's happening in Uganda. Obviously, I'll take very personal interest in that one. In terms of us not forgetting our history, absolutely. We cannot forget our history if we're going to move forward. However, the way to not forget our history is not by celebrating the colonialists. And this is what we're talking about with the naming of streets, the naming of states. We can have their stories in and have them in museums and taught in schools as part of history. And that's why the fact that history was scrapped in our schools at some point was heavily criticized, because we must learn. That's where a lot of us learned about Lugard, Flora Shaw, a number of people who played quite significant roles in the colonization and, to what Nigeria has emerged to be today. Even arguments around the amalgamation. In the past, the way it was sold to us in school was celebrating it, talking about, this was the man who discovered the Niger and amalgamate. And then later on, we found out that it wasn't actually quite altruistic. There were also, intentions behind that, and there are debates as to whether or not it has worked. Beyond that is the fact, with this Uganda ruling, 5,800 people had signed a petition prior to the court's ruling about this, and they're now saying that we want to reclaim our land back. And I do think it's something that we should consider here. But if we're reclaiming our land back, or we're saying that we want to do recolonization, let's also be able to stand on our own and not depend, because I don't know, Uganda, I hope they're also stopping foreign aid and not also allowing them to come into, because those are the conversations that we will have. If Africa is going to be truly free, it's beyond just taking away that's a start, the names from the streets. It's also being able to stand by on our own and come together as a coalition, as a continent.
Okay, I will run through the two subjects very quickly. First, let's start with Uganda. This is to be seen within the context of Pan-Africanism. Pride, identity. Dates back to the 60s, 70s, when Africans said, look, we are Africans and we have an identity, we have our culture, we have our heritage, leading to writers like Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who used to be James Ngugi, dropping James, and, which was the pattern among the nationalists at that time. Now, in more contemporary times, we've had things about repatriation, people asking for apology in the DRC, and then, some other countries saying they will rename cultural symbols and artifacts. Now, in Uganda, the process started 5 years ago, the year 2000. It was only last year, that September, an activist went to court, and then the judge has now ruled, Justice Seskana, saying, those names should be removed. But the major point is a point made by a human rights lawyer called Okpoyo, who says we should beware of revisionism. That this is part of our history. The colonial heritage is part of our history. In Niger, in Mali, in Guinea, they removed the names of the colonialists. Yes. In last year, Niger renamed Charles de Gaulle Bouvard and named that Bouvard after a nationalist. So you see that trend. Here in Nigeria, well, my personal opinion is that we should beware of revisionism, because some of these figures, colonial figures, are also part of that history that we cannot erase, particularly in a country like ours, where we no longer teach history. Maybe some of these monuments and naming systems will remind us. What African leaders should worry more about is the economic imperialism that Rufai talked about, yes. The reign of the hitman, which is a major problem in terms of economic development. Quickly, on the meeting today of the Defense Council of the European yes. Union. Now, the world is at a turning point truly, as Macron says, and they are looking at two issues. The turning point and the threat to Ukraine, and what that means for global peace. The threat from Donald Trump, who is talking about tariffs. Yes. China now is saying, whatever war the US wants, we will meet them, whether it's tariff war or it's trade war or any type of war. So the world is in danger as a result of Trump and Elon Musk adopting what is called Novus Ordo Seclorum. It's nothing esoteric. It's on the US dollar. It says a new world order. Trump sees himself as this Apollonian figure, yes. the son of Jupiter, who has now come to achieve the objective of annus septis. Providence smiles on our undertakings. That is what it means. So this is all what he's doing, and this is what he has summarized as America First, endangering other parts of the world. Yes. So the EU is looking about ramping up defense spending, seeing how they can protect Ukraine, because intelligence being withdrawn yes. in terms of support for Ukraine endangers the rest of the world, definitely. Endangers Europe, because definitely. The British, they are there with storm shadows. If they don't have intelligence, their people are endangered. More people will die. And that's why the UK Defense Secretary is going to Washington today to meet with Peter Hegseth to say, let's save the world. Maybe, what's his name, Zelensky is not penitent. He wants to have another meeting.
Yes.
But what America is interested in is those 116 metals, mineral resources
Yes,
that Ukraine has. It's also, again, about economic imperialism.
As always. Well, thank you all for your great thoughts on the World Brief. Let's move on to the newspapers. As ever, we begin with the front page of This Day. And This Day leads with the story of the moment, Senate President Godswill Akpabio, who has restated his regard for women and denies sexually harassing Senator Natasha Akpoti-Uduaghan. That's as the Senate dismissed the petition on alleged sexual harassment brought against the Senate President earlier on in the day. Now, protest and counter-protest did rock Abuja, as pictured on the front page of the Daily Trust. I know that Omo Bazwe released the report which we played, and also Adesuwa Giwa-Sagwe also released the report from the front lines of the protest. And she did a great job of really illustrating the opposing views on this controversial matter. And on that note, the Daily Sun reports on plans for a 1 million woman march to demand the Senate President's resignation. Meanwhile, the New Telegraph leads with the crisis rocking Rivers State as Professor Sagae and the Supreme Court's judgment is against the people of Rivers. That being said, the Senate's Electoral Commission fixes August 9th as the date for the fresh local government elections. And then moving on to the United Kingdom's Guardian, in addition to reports, as you just discussed, Dr. Abati, the United States stopping the sharing of intelligence with Ukraine, there's also a troubling statistic on the topic of mothers and their sons in the United Kingdom. Now, some research shows that nearly 1 in 10 of all women who died at the hands of men in the United Kingdom over the past 15 years were mothers killed by their own sons. Now, data analyzing the deaths of 2,000 women killed by men since 2009 has given an unprecedented insight into the hidden scourge of matricide, with more than 170 mothers killed by their sons. Very, very stark information there. And it's another reason why worldwide women should be protected here in Nigeria, across the African continent, and indeed across the world.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Adefemi, and hope to see you again tomorrow. A number of things to talk about, and of course, as expected, what's dominated the headlines is what happened yesterday in the Senate chambers. But we have guests today who will do justice to the topic. Very shortly, we'll bring them on board.